let me ask you something. How much of your life do you spend trying to avoid negative emotions like anger and sadness and envy? It makes sense, right? We want to feel good more than we want to feel bad. And we're told that we should control our emotions, in particular, the negative ones like anger and whatnot. But we're not very often told that we should control our good emotions. Well, I just read a fascinating book called Dancing with the Devil: Why Bad Feelings Make Life Good. This was written by Krista Thomason. She is a professor of philosophy at Swarthmore College. And I am thrilled to let y'all know this professor of philosophy, also a metalhead like us. And she argues in this book that you shouldn't avoid your negative emotions. And in fact, they are quite important and you should embrace them. I know we've all been told that we should avoid our negative emotions, but Dr. Thomason says we shouldn't. And we sat down for a chat about this book and not only talked about negative emotions and Stoicism and Buddhism and Nietzsche, but we also talked about metal. So without further ado, here is Krista Thomason with Dancing with the Devil. Krista Thomason, professor at Swarthmore College and author of Dancing with the Devil. Welcome to Heavy Metal Philosophy.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm very happy to have you because I really enjoyed your book, and I want to read in the acknowledgement. This first section here says, I listen to music while I write, and I want to thank the musicians that comprise my many playlists. There are too many to name, but a very special mention is due to the heavy metal bands because they are nearest and dearest: Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Dio, Black Sabbath, Mastodon, and Motorhead.
That's right.
I knew right away when I read it, it's like, okay, this is going to be good.
Yeah, they are my favorites. Heavy metal is definitely my genre.
Do you find that being a metalhead, it gives you, well, maybe this is a chicken and the egg question, but I'll ask it this way first. Yeah. It gives you sort of an insight into what people would describe in your book as negative feelings. You're a little bit more comfortable with your, quote, negative feelings than other people would be.
Yes, I absolutely think that's true. You know, you read all those studies that talk about how metalheads are actually, you know, despite appearances, very happy people for the most part, happy, well-adjusted human beings. And I think there's like not an accidental connection between those two things, right? Because I think part of it is we're just more comfortable exploring some of the darker sides of human nature, and I think the darker sides of personality. And we do that through the music that we listen to, right? Because the music we listen to also feels comfortable exploring those kinds of themes too. And so I think we're just sort of used to thinking of people as more complicated and thinking of human psychology as more complicated. And we know that exploring that part of yourself doesn't have to mean that, you know, you're treading in some kind of like weird, dangerous territory or something, and that you can explore that stuff and be fine and be, you know, perfectly well-adjusted human being. So, yeah, I think there's like a non-accidental connection between those two things for sure.
And that chicken and the egg thing, do you think that listening to heavy metal conditions us to be more receptive, or we were already predisposed to be more receptive, and therefore we wind up liking metal more often than not?
You know, that's a really good question. I wonder. So let me pose a question to you. So when you first started listening to metal, like, how did you get into it?
I was a little kid and was watching MTV late at night because I wasn't supposed to.
Right.
And Metallica's one video came on, and as soon as, you know, it starts off kind of slow and it's got this eerie vibe, you know, and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. But as soon as I heard that, I was like, what?
Exactly.
What is that? And it was instantaneous. I had to have more. I didn't decide to become a metalhead, people who listen to this podcast go, here he goes again. Cause I've talked about free will and determinism a lot.
Oh, nice.
I had no choice. I was
Yeah.
a metalhead from that point on. It was instantaneous.
Yeah.
I hadn't discovered all the music I was going to like yet,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew that my life was different from that point forward.
Yeah, definitely. No, I had very much the same experience. I was not, I actually didn't start listening to metal until I was in college, and it was Judas Priest, got my shirt on, that kind of like got me started. And I remember very clearly, I think it was Screaming for Vengeance. I can't even remember now the album, but I remember there's like a moment like Halford hits this like high note. And I just was like, it's like a chill went up my spine. And I was like, I gotta have more of this, right? It was like exactly my experience. So I guess I tend to think that there's something about us, right? There's something like constitutionally about us that like, when you listen to the music, it clicks for you. And I don't think everybody has that experience. I think a lot of people don't. I think maybe some people are kind of can like learn to appreciate it. But I think for most of us, the ones who are like real fans, I think we're more likely to have moments like that. So I think I would probably say, like, constitutionally, I think there's something about the music that jives with us, that sort of like pushes a button. And I don't think everybody's that way. So I don't know if that's connected to our being more accepting of negative emotions or not. But I think there is, I wouldn't say like being a metalhead is a choice. I would say it's, you get exposed to it, you hear it for the first time, and like a switch gets flipped and sort of like, that's it. But I don't know what's the relationship between that and negative emotions. I'm not sure if those things are related or not, or if it's just like, there's something about the music that, that turns that switch on inside of us.
Yeah. So I think that the book, Dancing with the Devil, Why Bad Feelings Make Life Good, is pretty universal. I don't think there's anything in here that's like specific to metalheads, but I do think metalheads will understand a little bit better. So let me give my basic understanding of the book, and please correct me if
absolutely.
I'm misinterpreting it.
Sure.
But I think your basic premise here is we have these negative emotions, and societally we've been conditioned to say, you shouldn't do that. You should try to control your anger. You shouldn't feel envy. And you argue, no, you should feel those things. It's actually what you do once you feel those emotions that's important. Mm-hmm. Feel the anger, but don't let it overrun you and then make bad decisions because you're angry. Mm-hmm. But you should actually feel it. And not only should you feel it, but you should embrace that feeling and think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think I think people basically have like an allergy to negative emotions. I think in our, and maybe that's like in the US, or maybe the context is broader than that. But I think sort of socially, we're really conditioned to think of these emotions as really dangerous. People will compare them to, oh, it's like a cancer. It's going to eat you up from the inside. They'll talk about it like it's toxic. It's going to poison you. And I think that leads us to this conclusion that when we feel these things, it's because there's something wrong with us, or it's because we're bad people, or we're making some kind of mistake, or we should, the minute we start feeling them, we should try to talk ourselves out of them, or we should come up with strategies to make them go away. That's really the attitude that I think that most people have toward our negative emotions. And yeah, I think that's just wrong, right? I think part of the problem is when we do all of that, and when we make all those assumptions, we're drawing a conclusion about what we think human emotional life is supposed to look like. And I think we wrongly think a healthy emotional life is only positive. Like the person who's the healthiest person is the person who only feels good feelings and who never feels bad feelings. And what I want to say is like, no, that's actually not a healthy person. Like a healthy person feels a really wide range of emotions, because your emotions are valuable, right? Your emotions pick up on stuff out there in the world. When you're angry, you're usually angry for a reason. When you're envious, you're usually envious for a reason. And what your emotions are doing is just kind of telling you that this is how the world is sort of showing up to me. Like, this is how I'm judging this situation. This is how I'm experiencing this situation. And because human life is complicated, your emotional life is also going to be complicated. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I really want people to try to get over this kind of allergy we've developed toward negative emotions and thinking that they're toxic, that they're poisonous, that they're going to kill us if we feel them too long. I think we should just say, like, look, we feel a really wide range of emotions. Sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're negative, but negative emotions are not this like dangerous thing that people have made them out to be.
So one of the examples you give in the book that I think really helps illustrate it is you talked about Orwell and Nietzsche. They both talked about emotional saints.
Yeah.
And there was the example of Gandhi. Now, we look to Gandhi like one of the paragons of virtue. He's really a complicated figure, but in general, you know, we don't think about his relationship with his son. And in the book, you talk about how his son was frustrated because his son was trying to live a normal life with his family and things that he enjoyed and things that he was frustrated with. And Gandhi was just up there being Gandhi all the time, saying, these are attachments. These are all things of the ego. You shouldn't be worried about these sort of things. And his son was frustrated, like, I just want to connect with my dad. I'm complaining about this thing at work, or
exactly.
I want to. And he wasn't able to because Gandhi was an emotional saint, according to Orwell.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's the emotional saints are these folks who, right. So like if you think about, we have this sort of allergy to negative emotions, right? So that means we've got this idea of this kind of ideal person in our heads, like who's the person who we should aspire to be like. And this emotional saint is kind of that figure, right? The emotional saint is the person who has, you know, who maybe only has the positive emotions or never gets angry about things, never gets their feathers ruffled. And Gandhi is very much like a type of that saint, right? Probably one of the more extreme versions. So because of his religious beliefs, he has this idea that, you know, we shouldn't be attached to the kind of world that's around us, right? Because that world is impermanent. That world is fleeting. Things come and go. Wealth can come and go. People die. People live. But it's all kind of like it's all in flux all of the time, right? And so Gandhi's strategy for all this is to sort of detach himself from the regular old everyday world around us, right? Like stop getting mad at like random people making comments online. Don't get pissed off when somebody cuts you off in traffic. Like forget about all that stuff because none of it's really important. None of it really matters. And for a lot of folks, that is kind of that's the advice that people will give when they want you to get over your negative emotions, is to have this kind of detachment, right? And we don't necessarily talk about it the way Gandhi did, but we still have that idea because we'll still say stuff like, oh, well, come on, that doesn't matter at the end of the day. Or like, that's just, you know, don't make a mountain out of a molehill, things like that. But yeah, so Gandhi, people hold him up as this kind of like paragon of virtue, like you said, and yet he had this really difficult relationship with his family, in part because they kind of had these concerns, like normal, average, everyday human concerns, kind of like the rest of us do. And Gandhi would sit there and be like, yeah, but none of that stuff is important. And so it's like, how do you relate to another human being who doesn't see human life, regular old boring parts of human life, who doesn't see any of those things as like worth caring about? I think people think of Gandhi as like a model, but they forget that it's actually really difficult to have a relationship to somebody who really, really has that view, who thinks that like none of this stuff is important, right? Like try complain, like go home and start complaining to your loved ones about your day. Oh, I had a rough day at work, blah, blah, blah. And have them like respond to you with like, yeah, well, but human life is fleeting and it's none of it's important from the perspective of the universe. So whatever. And you're like, how am I even supposed to have a conversation with somebody like that? But that's very much how Gandhi was. And so Orwell is the person who kind of points out, you know what? There's something kind of messed up about that attitude. Like it's not, we look at it and think like, oh, that's what I should aspire to be, right? I should try to be that Zen and try to, you know, not get bothered by anything out around me. But Orwell was the one who's like, yeah, but that's your life. That's what human life is made up of, is all those kinds of like average everyday concerns. And so it's actually like kind of weird that you would think it's a good idea to completely detach yourself from all of that. Like it's actually weird. It's a weird attitude to have. And so like Gandhi's not this figure that we should all aspire to be, actually. Like he has a mindset that's actually not healthy, at least not on Orwell's view, right? And not on mine either.
Yeah, Orwell said it's not human.
Yeah, exactly.
And that really unlocked the concept for me, because it's like, yeah, of course, be detached from things that would make you angry or sad. That's like conventional wisdom. But also, like, he couldn't have Gandhi couldn't have a meal with his family and talk about how good this food is. Gandhi was trying to like limit the amount of pleasure he got from food, a very inhuman experience, something that most of us can't relate to. Like, all the different cultures, one of the things that we have in common is sitting down for a meal with our family or clan or whatever. And the cultural sort of dishes that once I read it like that, I was like, oh man, that guy seems like somebody I don't want to be around.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's Orwell's point. Orwell's like, you don't want to hang out with somebody like that because their worldview is like so different from yours and so alien that there's not a way you can really relate to them. Right. And Orwell's whole point is that's not actually something we should think of as good. Like, we shouldn't think. I think that's what, a lot of times people will say, like, oh, it's really hard to be somebody like Gandhi, but still we should like give it the old college try and like, give it our all and see if we can make it there. Closer to Gandhi is better than not. And Orwell's point is like, no, actually closer to Gandhi is worse because it's not really human.
Yeah. I wrote a blog once about not taking certain philosophies to their logical conclusion. So, for instance, Stoicism, there's a real easy way to read that as a race to who can become the most efficient sociopath.
Right.
And like postmodernism, this is not very helpful for engineers. Like 2 + 2 needs to be 4 in certain cases. In certain cases, we need to have agreed upon truths that aren't, objective. A friend of mine who's currently studying for his PhD, he gave me a little bit of pushback. He's like, no, you actually should take these philosophies to their logical conclusion because that's instructive. And he talked about this concept of appropriateness. And I really love that word, because in certain scenarios, then these tools are very appropriate. Like so I want to get back to Stoicism. I found a lot of value in Stoicism, especially when I was young, because I had such a tumultuous childhood, and it sort of helped me to endure and overcome. But I feel like, and you touched on this a little bit in the book, I feel like the well has been somewhat poisoned recently by the online Stoics, the broicism that we see. And I find it kind of alarming that everybody's talking about Marcus Aurelius, which great, Meditations is great, but nobody talks about Zeno,
Right.
Marcus Aurelius was a conqueror. So of course it's very attractive for CEOs and whatnot to want to aspire to be like Marcus Aurelius. And it's very easy for Marcus Aurelius to say, yeah, it's not really about what happens to you while I'm conquering you, but it's how you deal with the hands that you're dealt. But you take a Stoic like Zeno, who was wealthy at first and then gets into a shipwreck and loses everything, and the rest of his life was in poverty. Now I'm much more receptive to listen to him talk about, okay, well, it's really about how you deal with what life gives you versus, because you can't really change that. You can only affect what you can affect.
Yeah, definitely. And somebody like Epictetus, right, who spent the first 25 years of his life in slavery, same thing, right? You might think like his take on Stoicism is probably a little different than Marcus Aurelius's. And, no shade to Marcus Aurelius. The Meditations was actually one of the first philosophy books I read, and I loved it. So you're talking to somebody who at some point was like super attracted to the Stoics, even though I'm critical of them in the book, right? And I think part of it is, I think it's helpful to think about like, what is it that Stoicism offers people? And the times when Stoicism is, I think, so helpful, and I think this was true of me too, when it's so helpful to you is when you feel like the external part of your life or the stuff that's like happening in your life either feels like it's completely falling apart, or you feel so out of control of the kind of like circumstances that you're living in. Right. So like I grew up in came up from like a real blue collar kind of background. I grew up in a really small rural town. And I was, as a kid who like loved books and loved reading and was intellectually curious, like the world that I was in wasn't particularly accommodating to somebody who was like me, right? And so I think I really got attracted to things like Stoicism because what it offered me was a kind of freedom, freedom from the circumstances that I found myself in. And I think a lot of the Stoics were like that. They lived through really troubled times, really difficult circumstances. And because they didn't have any control over any of that stuff, they looked inside to find some internal control, right? And I think that for people who are in a time when things are really turbulent or when they feel out of control or when their external circumstances are really kind of like at war with themselves, Stoicism is a really important antidote to that because of this thing that it offers you, right? It offers you this kind of freedom. And that's great. And sometimes people really need that. I think the problem, though, is kind of like Gandhi, a lot of times the Stoic advice is a kind of like, well, the stuff out there doesn't matter. And so because the stuff out there doesn't matter, or it's not real, or there's nothing you can do about it, therefore, you ought to be emotionally detached from it. And that's the part where I'm kind of like, but the thing is, we do care, right? We do care about the stuff that happens in our lives. Like, the example I use in the book is, the Stoics are going to tell me like, if I really am excited about this baseball game and the baseball game gets rained out and I'm disappointed about it, that's on me because I can't control the weather. And so if I'm upset about it, it's because I think I'm trying to control the weather or something like that. Whereas I want to say, well, it's not so much that I think I'm trying to control the weather and I know I can't control it, so it's like irrational. It's just that this was the thing I really cared about. And because I really cared about it, I was emotionally invested in it. And so that's why I'm experiencing this disappointment. And I want to say there's nothing wrong with being emotionally invested in stuff. Like, it's actually good for you to be emotionally invested in stuff because that shows you're not detached from the world in the way that somebody like Gandhi is. So I want to be like a little bit measured on the Stoics because on the one hand, I love them and they were part of my philosophical journey. And I think they really can. I've talked to so many people who got so much help right from the Stoics. But to your point, the sort of like bro-y version that you see now that's really attractive in like Silicon Valley and that kind of stuff, I think a lot of that's just coming from like, I don't know, they're like workaholics, right? And so they've got these like super busy kind of corporate lives. And I think Stoicism is somehow attractive to them because it gives them sort of this internal sense of control over their like weird corporate life. And you're sort of like, yeah, but you have control over your weird corporate life. Like, you could do something about that instead. Maybe work fewer hours, but like, that's not really what people are like. It's rather than do that, it's like, oh, now we're all good. And some of it too is just like about being macho, right?
Yeah,
it's like
you had a much more charitable interpretation than I do because I think they want to view themselves as philosopher kings or warrior poets. And that's why Marcus Aurelius is so attractive because that's what he was. And so you're this startup guy.
Yeah.
And especially like the real pencil necked versions that, Ivy League, trust fund, this gives them that sort of machismo that they were missing in their lives. That's my more cynical take on it.
You know what? I like that one too. I like that take also.
So the Gandhi thing, it really resonated with me because I spent a period of my childhood with my grandmother because my dad was in the military and he'd be deployed. Now, he served in peacetime, so let's be clear about what I mean by deployed. He was just gone for a period of time. And so I spent a lot of my childhood with my grandmother, and she was serious business about Southern Baptist Christianity. She was the clerk of the County Baptist Association. So she sort of coordinated all the activities from all the churches in the county. So that meant that I was basically in a church somewhere in the county every day, not just Sunday. And as a child, every little thing that I did, she had a Bible verse. shouldn't do that. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Something not in anger. There's like all these different things, just constantly.
Yeah.
And I got this feeling very early on, like I can't. This is impossible. It's just every little thing. And so I very much relate to Gandhi's son in that regards. Like, can we just be normal for a minute? And and then I also relate to what you said about growing up in a rural place and having some curiosity about things. I remember one thing my grandmother said to me is, because I was trying to get this book, and she said, the only book you need is the Bible. And I was like, oh my God. Even as like a 5-year-old, I was like,
wait a minute.
yeah. And I discovered Stoicism in high school and also becoming a metalhead in middle school. It gave me, I left that town. I got out of there, and I don't know if I would have, had I not discovered Stoicism, had I not been a metalhead, had I not felt like I don't fit in here. There's nothing for me here. I could have easily been one of the townies that didn't leave, just does all the things that people in that town do, which is not much.
Yep.
So I found so much value in that. So I agree with you. I don't want to say Stoicism is wrong. I want to say taking it so far is a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. And again, I think there's a lot of Stoics who really have more of that view. They were a bit more, Seneca in some ways is like that. Like Seneca's kind of a practical guy. He wasn't sort of saying, detach yourself completely from all the things. And, he was really trying to give people ways to navigate the situation that they were in, so a lot of it really depends on the Stoics, which Stoic you're talking about. But yeah, there's I think that's one of the things that this is, one of those places where I actually think metal and philosophy sort of have a lot in common. Oftentimes, like when you hear people talk about their early exposures to both of them, what they share is this idea that like this stuff shows you that there's another world or like another way to be. Somebody, philosopher who does some stuff on public work has talked about philosophy being like a bridge. So he was talking about his own background, growing up really poor in the UK. And he was saying like it was philosophy was like a bridge to another world. It was a place where it was a way for him to like mentally leave the world that he was in and go to a different place. And I think for a lot of people, that is what's attractive, right? Both about Stoicism, but just like philosophy in general, is that it like opens up these doors and you could think, wow, things can be different from the way that they are right now. And it lets me go to this different place and explore this place, right? Because and metal was like that for me in a lot of ways. Because I'm not a person who I'm often not in a position to be able to like express a lot of anger, right? Especially as a woman, you're usually told like that's not okay for you to do any of that stuff. And, I was a lot of my feelings were policed when I was little, where it was like, don't be too angry, don't be too upset, don't cry about stuff. Like everything, your emotional life was very, especially as a kid, right? People are trying to train you, to self-regulate. Okay, that's good. But then even past that, I remember really clearly, times when I was like in high school and I'd be mad about stuff. And like the number of times people told me to calm down throughout my life is like, there's so many. If I had a dime for every time somebody told me to calm down, I'd have lots and lots of dimes, right? And so there was something about metal that I was like, this is a place where I'm actually able to kind of feel this stuff through the music, and I can experience, and I can sort of like feel the anger that's, I'm listening to Pantera and I can like feel the anger that's in it's in that stuff. And like, it's okay. And it's like almost like living emotionally kind of vicariously through the music. But I think that's actually one of the things that philosophy and metal have in common is they give you these alternative places to be, these alternative worlds to exist in. And for a lot of us, I think that's particularly like, in our younger years, we like really need that. You need somebody to say things could be different.
I agree. So you talked about being angry growing up. definitely relate with that. So it's very dissatisfied with the world around me.
Yeah.
And I've noticed this thing where when people find their thing, it really becomes their thing. It's like religious, so this can happen when you discover Stoicism. You just dive in and you handle every situation that way. This can happen with CrossFit,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
There was the joke when CrossFit first hit, like, how do you know when somebody's into CrossFit? Because it's all they talk about.
Right.
Veganism, whatever it is that is your thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have easily been that about Stoicism because it made so much sense to me. Like everything that I encounter is just like, okay, well, how would, Zeno feel about this, or Marcus, or whatever? And it simplified everything. It just made so much sense. But it was actually anger that helped temper some of my feelings about that, because they're saying, don't be angry. And I'm finding like, well, maybe I should be angry. It's kind of weird to me when people aren't angry about certain things. It's like, what, you mad, bro? Yes. Why,
yes,
why
I am.
aren't you mad? Does this surprise you?
Right.
It surprises me that because it's not surprising, this suddenly justifies it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where is our righteous fury at some of the things that are going on in the world around me? And so you said in the book that anger is actually love for the self.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that can carry negative connotations too, love for the self. One thing that I did come back to thinking about often while reading this book is like, this seems exactly like what most people need to hear. But I keep thinking about outliers, people that are just angry all the time, or depressed people, or envious people that they can't get over, I can definitely, but I also hate it when I make a point and somebody goes, yes, but there's this one exception.
Right. Which philosophers do all the time. Totally. No. Yeah. And I mean, and you're absolutely right. There is, I think when people listen to me talk about my work and I talk about, the value of negative emotions, I think a lot of people get concerned because they see, look, there are people out there who are extremely angry, and there are people out there who are extremely envious. And you look at them and you think, yeah, but they don't seem like they're living too well, right? They seem like things are not going so well for them. And so if I'm a person who's saying good things about negative emotions, well, how am I going to then turn around and say, yeah, but that person shouldn't be as angry as they are, or that person shouldn't be as envious? Can I recognize that's also kind of a bad way to be? And and I think I think you're right. I think, my book is really, the audience for my book is like the vast majority of human beings who are just like scared to death of negative emotions. Like that's who really is the audience. There are some other people, though, who may need to hear kind of a different message, right? The way I want to put it is, I think there are people who are too angry, and there are people who are too envious. But what I want to say is, it's not so much the emotions themselves that are making them that way. What I want to say is, there's something else going on with how they view themselves, like how they relate to themselves, that's causing them to have all of this like persistent anger or all this persistent envy. And so, so one of the arguments that I make in the book is that, a lot of times, like, and this is both like why negative emotions are for people kind of scary, is because they are about you, right? A lot of times it's about you. So when we feel angry, it's because we think we're being mistreated or insulted or threatened or something like that. So if you've got somebody who constantly feels like their sense of self is being like threatened, or their sense of self is being stepped on or something like that, then that's going to be a person who feels angry a lot. But what I want to ask is sort of like, well, what's the cure for that person? Like, what's going to help them? I'm not sure that just addressing their feelings of anger is what's going to help them. I think what's going to help them is asking the question, well, why?
Yeah.
Why do you feel threatened all the time? Why do you feel insulted all the time? Right? Why do you feel like somebody's always trying to tread on you? And if you can start asking that question, I think you're probably going to get to the root of the problem better than just addressing their anger. So what I want to say is their anger is like a symptom.
Yeah.
It's not the problem, right? It's a symptom of whatever this other problem is. And so a lot of times I think when we look at people and we think, their emotions are the issue, I don't actually think it's their emotions that are the issue. I think it's their kind of like sense of self that's the issue. And the emotions are doing what they always do. So if you feel threatened and insulted, you're going to be angry about that. I think the question you have to ask yourself is like, why do I constantly feel insulted or threatened? Like that's maybe that's something that I'm not, like maybe there's something I'm misperceiving that somehow. And like that's really what's going to be kind of, the root of the problem and not so much your feelings of anger.
That's very clarifying and well put, because that person that's in my mind's eye right now that's just angry all the time, saying, hey man, stop being so angry. That's not really fixing it. It's whatever's causing that anger. That's what needs to be addressed. Mm-hmm. And one of the arguments you made in the book that also sort of convinced me, you talked about, we don't have this same viewpoint about positive emotions. It's good to love, but these things can be taken too far as well. It can turn into obsession and infatuation, and metalheads, I think in particular, will be very familiar with the concept of toxic positivity. Mm-hmm. It's like nobody wants to be around these people that can't acknowledge reality. And I think another one of those things where taking things too far is trying to do everything with logic and reason. When you write it down on paper, it sounds exactly right. We should handle all things with logic and reason, and that's very attractive to me, especially when I was young. It's like, of course, this is. But then you get around these people that are like, well, actually, about every little thing you say is like, oh my God, can we just please be normal for a minute?
Exactly. I spend a lot of time thinking, can we just please be normal for a minute? I think I have that thought like once a week easily. Yeah, for sure. It kind of goes to that. Again, what's the ideal we have in our heads, right? And the ideal seems to be, again, this person who only feels positive emotions. And in the book, I call it the emotion double standard, right? So it's like we treat negative emotions like they have these magical powers, but we don't say the same thing about positive emotions. So like nobody ever tells you, listen, it's okay for you to feel joy, but you just need to manage it well. Like literally no one ever says that, right? And yet people say that about anger or envy all the time. So your negative emotions are things you have to manage, but your positive emotions are never things you have to manage or moderate or whatever, however you want to put it. And there's this kind of trust of positive emotions as though the person who feels only positive things is like absolutely just a normal, well-adjusted human being, right? It's like, oh yeah, they're just better than everyone else, the person who only feels positive stuff. And nobody ever thinks like, but wait a second, positive emotions, there's no way they can ever go wrong, but surely they can, because you've met people, right? I know I've met people who, they look on the surface like they're just like, oh, I'm just a joyous, optimistic person. But then you kind of like get to know them and you discover that their joyous optimism is just like actually because they're either like really naive about the world or because they're kind of trying to like force themselves into a sort of optimism, right? This is like, there's a this kind of trend on social media. I don't know how popular it is anymore, but like for a while there, everybody was like, I will manifest positive things for myself, right? And you're like, you're listening to them and you're like, okay, let me get this straight. You just think that if you just put enough like positive energy out there in the world, then like a new car is going to appear in your driveway. Do I have that right? Because like that's what it sounds like you're saying is what manifesting is. It reminds me, I'm like an 80s kid. So like it reminds me of the Care Bears, where it was like, if I just like the rainbow, of the Care Bears will like somehow figure out like this is like it has these like magical powers, like positivity can be shot out there into the universe or something like that. which you like, you listen to people talk about that and you're like, that's delusional, man. Like you just like, that's not how the world works. It's not like if you just think hard enough, like good thoughts hard enough, then like magic things will happen. Because, you know, I mean, think about how offensive that would be to be like, oh, I have cancer, but it's because I wasn't positive enough. And like, that's why this bad thing happened to me. Like nobody would think that. And yet when you talk about this kind of like manifesting sort of attitude, that is actually kind of what you're implying, is that if bad stuff happens to somebody, it's because they just weren't positive enough. They just didn't have the right kind of attitude. And that's really nuts. You know, like that kind of attitude is like it's a real denial of how reality actually is. And so like, that's the kind of thing where I'm saying, look, positive emotions, they don't always signal that somebody is like just healthy and well adjusted. They can also be messed up in a lot of ways. And so we need to like realize that it's not just negative emotions that can go wrong. Positive emotions can also go wrong. And then the sort of right, the toxic positivity thing is this kind of, you know, persistent idea that there's something wrong with you if you're experiencing any kind of negativity. And that too is like it's an outcropping of this kind of like, well, you just have to think positive and everything's going to be fine. But yeah, it's not, that can be really harmful to people. This idea that if you're feeling bad, something's really wrong with you. Again, like there's lots of cases where we wouldn't say that. If I lose a loved one and I'm grieving for that person, like, are you going to tell me that somebody's going to come along and go, well, that's just a problem with your, you know, there's something wrong with you that you're grieving, that you're feeling all those terrible things. I doubt anybody would say that. And yet that kind of idea that like overall your emotional life should always be positive, it kind of doesn't leave room for that sort of stuff. I remember I had a friend who lost her child, like lost a baby, right? And she would constantly encounter these people. She grieved for a long, long, long time about that, as one would, right? Grieved for a really long time. But she kept encountering these people who would basically kind of imply that she'd grieved long enough and that she should be done. And it's kind of like, why is there a time limit on that? Like, I didn't know there was a time limit on the grief that you feel when you lose a kid. I'm pretty sure there's not. But even then, this is a case where people are like so allergic to negative emotions that they think, well, but I mean, it's fine for you to grieve for a while, but now you got to get over it. And that's weird. That's real weird.
Do you think they're doing that because subconsciously it's for them? It's for them to, you should stop so that I don't have to feel this.
Yes, I actually do. I think a lot of people do that because they're uncomfortable with the idea. They don't know how to be around someone who's feeling negative emotions. I think a lot of times our push to get people to get over it has a lot more to do with the fact that we're uncomfortable, right? I don't want to interact with you when you're angry or when you're envious because I don't know how. And so it would be better for me. I'm uncomfortable with your feelings because they don't sort of like fit this picture that I would like to have. Like I'd like to be true, right? I want everybody to feel good all the time. And so you're messing that up and having these bad feelings. And so I don't want to interact with you like that. It's for my comfort, I think.
Yeah, that's the first thought that I had. And also that situation, there's no fixing it. It's like, you know, she can have more children. All sorts of great things can happen, and that will never not be awful.
Absolutely.
It will never not be the worst thing that's ever happened versus like, you know, a breakup or something. People will say very patronizing things that I hate, like, you know, things happen for a reason.
Oh, yeah.
You know, but eventually there is sort of an expected like time where you stop grieving for that relationship that ended. But this is one where you never, there's no fixing it.
Yep.
And that's very uncomfortable. And I think people have a real hard time with just accepting.
Yep.
And here's where Stoicism and Buddhism is valuable. Like, this is the world we live in. This is reality. There is no fixing it. There is no combination of words that I can say to bring you comfort. You just kind of have to live in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the place where I think, you know, I don't think I'm sort of like so opposed to the Stoics and the Buddhists. I actually think there's stuff that we have, you know, my own view and their views like overlap in some places. And this is one of them, right? The place where, look, you've just got to come to terms with what life is really like. And that's partly why I think when you do that, you're going to then give up on the idea that the only way to feel is positive, because that means you've got to really confront the fact that your life is absolutely not always going to go well. That, as a matter of fact, like if you think about it, if you start thinking about all the people you've known in your life, and you think about just like the normal run of the mill tragedies that people encounter, people lose loved ones. That's what it means to be a human being in the world, is to like love people who will die. You will get sick. Your loved ones will get sick. People lose their jobs, right? There's like, think about all the people you know and start cataloging all the bad stuff that's happened to them. It doesn't even have to be that unusual, because everybody is going to encounter hardship at some point or another in their life. That's what it means to be alive in the world. And once you face that, you then think, well, look, it doesn't make any sense for me to think I should always feel good, because life's not always going to feel good. And so that kind of like radical acceptance that life's not always going to work out and things aren't always going to go well, I think leads you to try to give up this sort of, you know, everything always has to be sunshine and rainbows emotionally for me all the time.
So before we go, I want to tackle some of the negative emotions that we go over in the book, because some of them are really easy for me. And I think that's just a part of my personality. So for instance, anger. I got no problem there.
Yeah.
I kind of like my anger a little bit. My wife gets a little annoyed because I can't fix things without cursing. As I'm working on things, I'm just swearing. I'm real angry when it doesn't go my way. And this is helpful to me, and I don't really know how to explain how it's helping me to get through it. And
that's right.
I think it's only logical to be angry at the world I live in, because it's quite unjust, and people turn a blind eye to all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Contempt, that one's easy for me. It sounds terrible, but I find a lot of value in contempt.
Yeah.
There's this saying, YOLO, you only live once, and people will say this when they're going out to party.
Right. Right.
But I think about YOLO in terms of like, I'm cutting this person off.
Right.
Because this person could negatively influence my life. And I only have one life, which makes it the most valuable thing. And so I'm protecting this thing that I value. And contempt, judging people, sounds negative, but this is very, very valuable to me. So let's get to some that I don't quite value.
Sure.
Envy. This one's not very conducive to my personality. I don't find any value in envy.
Yep.
When I was a kid, I felt a lot of envy for the kids that I didn't understand this concept at the time, but they had privilege. They had both their parents, they had, when they asked for things, their parents could buy them. They had connections. That saying, it's not who you are till you know, that used to make me so angry.
Oh, yeah.
And until I figured out that's really just the way the world works. And Stoicism helped me get over that envy, and helped me get my own accomplishments to sort of get a handle on not feeling so deficient. And now I find envy it's not only not useful to me, it's quite detrimental. Stops me from doing things the way I've been doing them.
Yeah. No, I'm very much an envy defender. And it's not so much that I think envy is good to feel and we should like absolutely, we should like seek it out, right? That's not quite what I mean. What I want to say is it's valuable because the way I'm going to put it is it's the price of admission, right? It's the price of admission for being a person who cares about your life. So like I care about my life. I want it. That means I have a kind of view about how I want it to go. There are things that I want I want to have as a part of my life. And when I see somebody else with those things, I think it's just psychologically really difficult for me to be like, good for them. Like, I'm not going to feel like good for them to have like they're enjoying the thing that I want for my life. So what I mean by that is like envy is just the signal. It's kind of like, when you turn the light on and the light comes on, it's like, it's the signal that there's electricity flowing. So envy is the signal that, that my life is something that matters to me, that I care about it. And so because I care about it, I'm going to have a vision for how I want it to go. That means I'm going to say, like, there's certain things I want to be a part of my life. And I'm going to be upset if they're not there because I care about my life and I want it to look a certain way. So all envy is doing is kind of like alerting me to the fact that my life matters to me. I have a vision for how it's going to go. And it doesn't look like that right now. Why? Because I'm seeing somebody else enjoy something that I want for myself. And I'm like, that's telling me my life isn't how I want it to look. And so is that like the most mature response? Well, again, it kind of depends on what your ideal is supposed to be. And just because an emotion is, maybe not wise, like spite is like this, right? Talk about spite in the book. Maybe it's not the smartest thing to feel. I don't think that means that there's anything wrong with feeling it. I think envy is actually one of the ones we have the hardest time with, because we're so sure that in feeling it, it kind of like shows that we're defective somehow. And so we really never want to admit it. People have a really, really hard time openly admitting that they feel envy about something. They have a really, like, people are real open, can be. They can be real open about their anger. Yeah. They're really not open about their envy. People feel a lot of like, people never want to really admit that they're envious about something. And I think that's really telling, because I think partly we're really hesitant to admit we feel it because we've been socialized to think that caring about ourselves is bad. That if you care about yourself, you're like a narcissist, you're selfish, you're an egotist. And because we have this kind of like suspicion of people who care about themselves, when you admit that you're envious, you're admitting, I care about my life to the point where I'm like upset because there's something about it that's not going the way that I want it to go. And I think people are really suspicious of that. I think deep down, we still have a very sort of Judeo-Christian view towards self-love, that it's something evil, that it's something bad, that it's something that's going to get out of control, that it's going to make us narcissists or whatever. But I think there's a healthy version of that. And it's okay to care about yourself. It's okay to care about your life and have an idea about how you want your life to look.
I think it's just my personality. I think that's one of the privileges, I guess, that I have is I don't find any value in envy. It's easy for me when somebody gets something to go, good for them. That's awesome. I enjoy the happiness that I feel for them. I think maybe the best way to describe it is maybe I jump over a rung in the ladder, because there comes a point where I skip envy and go straight to contempt.
Oh, okay.
So if I see somebody like being just super wasteful, like somebody gets like a Bentley or something, I don't want a Bentley. I'm just like, why? Why are you doing that? Why are you wasting the inefficiency? I find contemptible. I think maybe it's because the things that I value come from like hobbies.
Could be.
I want to be better at chess, and because I'm doing so many other things, my chess game is suffering. I want to be in shape, so I have workout equipment. The material things that I buy are for the non-material goals that I have. I want efficiency that opens up more time. I need more time to do. I don't have enough life to do all these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I actually think that's a place, I think I have a tendency to feel envy about people who have like skills and stuff that I don't have. Right. So like I remember really, and it wasn't like I was mad at all the people in Montreal, but like I went to Montreal and there were these people who were switching seamlessly between French and English. And I love studying languages. And so like, I want to know all of them and I want to study all of them. And I don't have enough hours in my day to be able to do that. So then when I'm in Montreal and I'm like listening to these people and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so envious. Like I'm so envious of the people who have that ability because they're able to do this like seamless back and forth between English and French. And I'm like, oh my God, they're so fluent. And I wish I was like that. But all my envy in that case is doing, at least for my, like in my mind, is it's just signaling to me, I care about that. Like that's a thing I want for myself is like, and it's not like I wish they don't have it. I don't wish that they would like lose their ability. I don't wish anything ill on them at all. I'm a little bit like, I begrudge it in the sense that I'm jealous. I'm like, oh God, I wish that was me. But yeah, my envy is almost always mixed with like, I never wish that somebody loses the thing that I want. It's just that I want it too. Yeah. And I'm like pained by the fact that I don't have it. So like, I'm pained by the fact that I don't have fluent French. I really am.
I can relate. I'm trying to learn German and it is difficult.
Oh boy.
So the last one that I have, well, actually there's two, but I think they're related. Spite and Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
I had a nice little section in the book about Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
And this is one that I can't help but feel. It's just real natural to feel that Schadenfreude. But again, I don't find any use for it the way that I do for my anger. I find my anger very useful. It's a tool that I can use. Schadenfreude is, so there's a lot of it going on right now. You know, the market's tanked and people are like, see, it serves you right. It's like, yeah, but you live here too. Like, this is bad for all of us.
And this is bad for all of us. Yeah. And Schadenfreude has this way of like, I think there's a way you can feel it where you're just like reveling that somebody else is hurting. But I think most of the time it's not like that. I think most of the time our Schadenfreude is directed at people who we think, even if they don't say it explicitly, we think are sort of setting themselves above us, right? So like my favorite example of Schadenfreude is anytime you know somebody who brags about their handyman skills, who just acts like they know everything there is to know about fixing stuff. And you like kind of know they're bullshitting, right? But like you don't want to say it. But then something happens and they end up in this like epic plumbing disaster or something because they tried to fix it themselves. And there's a part of you that's like, I knew that was coming. You know what I mean? And so I think the reason we feel that, right, is because like, here's this person who's basically been like bragging about how great they are and they're setting themselves up above everybody else. And then when they screw up, guess what? You're just like the rest of us. Right. And so like, I think there's a kind of Schadenfreude that's like, you know, we're all in this boat together, man. And like you were the one who started acting like you were better than everybody else. And it turns out you're not. And so, yeah, so you brought up the question of like, is that useful? I think I want to ask the question, do our emotions always have to be useful? Like maybe they're not, like maybe that's not the kind of thing that they are. Maybe they don't have to serve some other purpose. Maybe the thing that they're doing is just, they're part of what it means to care. And so like, again, it's like the price of admission. If I care about my life, then this is the emotional life I'm going to have. I'm going to have these negative emotions. And all that means is just like, I don't get another option. If I'm emotionally invested in my life and it matters to me, then I'm going to be susceptible to all these feelings and better go ahead and accept that because the alternative is not caring. The alternative is Gandhi, right? And if that's not who you want to be, then be invested, care about your life, care about yourself. And those negative emotions are just going to come along with it. It's a package deal.
Yeah. The only argument that I have at the ready is what you've already said, that, you know, it's a signal. These emotions are a signal that are letting you know something.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think with Schadenfreude, there's a real natural, I mean, I definitely feel this, that real satisfaction that comes from somebody effing around and finding out.
Exactly.
And I think that comes from all of us perceive that there's really not as much justice in this world as we'd like. So when we do see somebody getting theirs, it's like,
Exactly. Exactly. Because you oftentimes don't see it, right? You see the opposite happening. You see people like not getting their comeuppance for doing crappy things and people getting away with a lot of stuff that they shouldn't be getting away with. And so then when, when those moments come, you're kind of like, okay, it's reassuring because it kind of feels like good. There, sometimes it doesn't work out for the jerks out there. And that's good to be reminded.
Yep. And sometimes we don't get what we deserve. It goes the other way too. It's very frustrating, especially me as a kid growing up fundamentalist Christian, I was taught that there's like, for lack of a better word, there's some sort of karma I just don't believe in. I don't believe in Christian justice, and I don't believe in Eastern karma either. I think life is what it is. And, bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. Yeah. Neutral things happen all the time that we simply don't observe. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you. There's not, I think it would be a mistake to think there's some, behind somebody pulling the strings behind the scenes, to make it all work out. Right. And so then the question you're faced with, if you accept that is, is it worth getting on the ride, even if that turns out to be true? Right. And I think for me, the answer to that is yes. Being a human in the world comes with a lot of ups. It comes with a lot of downs, but it's a beautiful, complicated, difficult thing. And I wouldn't trade it for anything else.
Agreed. That's Camus, the myth of Sisyphus right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I really enjoyed Dancing with the Devil. I think this is going to be quite valuable to a lot of people. I think just hearing this, hey, it's okay. It's okay to be angry. Don't let it, override your good sense, but it's there for a reason. Your sadness is there for a reason. Your dissatisfaction is there for a reason. And there's multiple more in here that we didn't talk about. So I highly recommend Dancing with the Devil, Why Bad Feelings Make Life Good.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Hey, before the episode ends and we play the riff of the week, I just want to say one thing to you about this book. I hope you enjoyed that conversation we just had, but I want to say something in particular about the book. See, a lot of books on philosophy, especially written by academics, they are very technically written, full of jargon and lots of nested ideas that you kind of have to know the work of 40 other thinkers to even be able to absorb the work of this one. It makes contemporary philosophy very difficult to read. And I am very pleased to let you know that Krista did not do that. She made this a very easy book to read. So even when she's talking about one of the concepts that somebody like Nietzsche or Confucius talks about, she breaks it down and makes it easy to understand. And it's not one of those deals where you got to look up concepts to understand what's going on. This is a easily digestible book. So I'm going to have a link in the description where you can get your hands on your copy. And I hope that you will take some of these words to heart and embrace your negative feelings as well as your positive feelings. But not too far. Let's feel good and headbang. But most importantly, read philosophy, listen to metal. I love you.